I'm Sam Kerr. I'm a principal product manager here at GitLab, and today I wanted to walk you through the initial concept of what we're calling webhook-based audit events. So let me share my screen and we'll go through the epic together. So you can see the epic here. Notably, I'm recording this video on May 4th, 2021. Depending on what day you're watching this video, this epic might have changed. We might make some new directional choices, made some updates to the concept. So I'm hoping this video gives you the foundation and the background of how we're approaching this problem. But please refer to the epic and any issues for the ultimately latest set of information. Feel free to reach out to myself or members of the team if you have other questions that aren't answered either by this video or by the epic or any linked issues. And so let's jump into the epic. And really the way we can start this conversation is by talking about what are the problems and the use cases that we want to solve today. And what we've realized as we've worked on our current audit event system inside of GitLab, users get a lot of value out of this. It's very important. It's critical that people understand what's going on inside their GitLab instance, who made changes, what changes were made, and when those changes occurred. Today, we offer several different ways to view these events. They can be viewed under the project tabs, the group tabs, or under the administration screens for an instance. And some of the use cases these are designed to support are really around, again, understanding how, when, and who is interacting with the GitLab instance. But we've also realized there's some use cases out there that our users have that we don't really have great ways to service. And that's really some of the impetus for why we want to focus on webhook-based audit events. And one of the use cases we've discovered when talking with our users is that they want to be able to access these audit event logs outside of GitLab. They need access to that data so that they can do things with it that might not be possible directly inside of GitLab. For example, many organizations have a SIEM or other ways that they integrate other data streams that come from outside of GitLab, maybe from production traffic, maybe from internal email or office systems, and they want to work to correlate that with the GitLab data. Today, there's not really a great way to do this, and so this use case we're not really able to effectively service with our current approach. Additionally, because of how GitLab approaches audit events today, we log everything that occurs inside the instance. And this is great because it makes sure that we don't miss anything. But for users that are looking for a needle in a haystack, to use the turn of phrase, that makes it very difficult to find that needle because of the large haystack of events. Our users want to be able to create subsets of these events. For instance, perhaps a user only wants to see what new users were created inside of a specific project. There's not a really great way to do that today, so they have to sift through the entire set of audit logs, when if we could find ways to do subsetting or filtering of our current logs, this would be very easy. Another use case that we're constantly working on but having difficulties with due to our current approach is that users want to see more activity instead of GitLab being logged as audit events. And we have a large epic that you can find a link, and I'll add it in the description of this video. We have a large epic full of many different types of events that we want to add to GitLab, but this comes with a couple challenges. First, it's going to be difficult to add all of those because the list is so long. It'll take us a while to get through that list and get to the events users want to see. And it also means that there's some technical challenges on GitLab's side because we are currently responsible for storing all of those events. We have to be mindful of how much extra data will these different events generate and how do we effectively store that in our different database systems. On those lines of things that are of interest for GitLab, our current approach also has a few concerns. Right now, we currently store all of our audit events in the same database as everything else. And so this means that any performance issues that are going to be affecting the whole database are also going to be affecting audit events and vice versa. I mentioned it a second ago, but there's going to be large ongoing storage requirements, especially as we add more and more audit events to our audit logging system and as we get more users on the platform. Something that goes hand in hand with that, if we ever do decide that we want to add audit event logging for data streams that we expect to be high volume, such as if we wanted to capture individual Git activity, Git commits, edits to code, which happens very, very frequently as part of our users' use of the platform. That's going to be very challenging with our current architecture as well. At GitLab, our data retention policies are set in a specific way for how long we will keep and maintain data. And this may or may not be different than what our users are expecting, what those requirements they might have. So if a user in GitLab have different data requirements, it can be challenging to find a way to reconcile those two to make sure that we're able to satisfy that, since we're storing all of those events in the same way for all users. And also, it can be difficult for us to add new events because audit events are so tightly integrated with the rest of the GitLab application. That means that there's potentially many different places that we need to touch as part of adding new event types. And this can make it challenging and more time consuming to work through that long list of events that we want to add in the future. Um, I also went through and I tried to summarize a lot of these issues I just spoke about graphically on this problem statement board. Feel free to take a look there. We won't go through them again. And so what this video is really about is about reviewing the proposal for what we're going to be calling webhook-based audit event systems. And so conceptually, the way that we want to approach this is, rather than having GitLab storing all these events, integrating them deeply into the application itself, we want to identify those behaviors that we want to capture audit events for, and we want to be able to send those events as they occur to an external user-defined destination. Additionally, we want to allow our users to customize which events are sent to this destination so they can focus only on the events that they really care about and not worry about the events that they're not as concerned about. And this is going to help address a lot of those different problems that we just walked through. Some of the benefits of this approach is that it's going to allow users to have more control over what they're going to be considering important to monitor in their systems. It's going to help them find that needle in the haystack by making the haystack smaller. And because they're going to be able to send these events to any destination of their choice, it's going to make it much, much easier to interface GitLab audit events with any of the other data streams that our users might already have in their systems. Additionally, this helps address some of the GitLab specific concerns that I was talking about as well. Because we'll be sending these events to an external destination, this allows us to decouple a lot of the audit event processing from a lot of the rest of the parts of GitLab, the application, such as that single database data storage center. This is going to make it easier for running and managing GitLab, because that will offload some of that database storage and computation load to this extra external endpoint. Additionally, because we're going to be able to refocus on doing this as a webhook-based sort of approach, this will presumably make our technical implementation much more straightforward, because it should amount to a few API calls surrounding whatever sort of activity we want to create a log for, and not require as deep of an implementation for each of the individual events that we want to continue adding. And so I do want to talk about how this will relate with our existing audit event system inside of GitLab. For the purposes of this video, I'll call them classic audit events. And by that, I mean the audit events that we have today that are stored inside of GitLab. And really this proposal is intended to be additive rather than a replacement of these classic audit events. We currently plan that classic audit events will remain in place as they are today. One of the key factors for our classic audit event system is that we want there always to be a single place, a single source of truth for some of the most critical activities that occur inside of your GitLab instance. We understand that by sending audit events to an external system, it might be difficult in some cases if those events are lost in the external system, if there's not a way to replay them. It can be very difficult to find some of the most impactful activities that have occurred in your GitLab instance. And so we have gone through in our group's direction page and made a prioritized list of some of the most critical types of events that we consider for what happened inside of GitLab, and those will likely remain inside of the classic audit event system for the foreseeable future, so that even if the external webhook-based audit events aren't set up, you'll still have that record of all those really, really critical events that occur in your instance. Um, Notably, I also want to point out for some events, we might record them in both the classic audit event system as well as a webhook-based audit event system. Just because something's in classic audit events doesn't mean it wouldn't be in webhook. Just because something was in a webhook-based audit event system doesn't mean that it would not be added to classic. And so with that, let's keep scrolling through the proposal. I'm not going to talk about licensing. We have a lot of discussions to do around this, so this is subject to change. We'll come back to it. But so I did want to talk about a proposal for an iteration plan of how we could begin to attempt to tackle working on webhook-based audit events. And the first iteration that I would propose is what would be a internal-only technical preview iteration, really designed to help us understand and better uncover any of the potentially difficult spots we would want to update and really refine before we exposed webhook-based audit events to customers and our end users. And what this would focus on is really three key things. And I'm showing that graphically here as well as some notes, but the first one would be we would want to make sure that we understand how to create that subset of the different audit events that we would want to be exposing to our end users. And so conceptually, I've got just a list of checkboxes here. There's definitely going to be a need for a lot of exploration about how to do this effectively, as well as where we would want to put these settings, who can access them, what sort of permissions there around that we need to put. And so that's going to be one of the goals of this internal only tech preview iteration. We would also want to stand up a temporary system with GitLab to validate that, hey, we're sending these webhook-based audit events, they are being received, they look like what we expect. And notably, this should not be inside of the GitLab database that we use today. This should be a separate system. Because one of the key goals is to get all of the audit events out of the GitLab database, this would be a requirement that this temporary system would be outside of the GitLab database as well. And then really the third final goal is, as we work on those first two capabilities, identifying any of the technical or the UX challenges that we need to solve before we expose this to our end users would be another one of the goals of this first iteration. If there's anything that we identify that really has to be resolved before we expose this to customers, that would be one of the intended outcomes of this third point, or the creation of follow-on epics or issues for refinements that we can do over time as we get the bandwidth and the ability to do so. So for our first user-facing iteration that's both minimal and viable, this would really be focused on taking what we did in that first technical preview sort of iteration and doing any of the refinements, incorporating any of the feedback that we got from that iteration, but also adding the ability to specify a destination for where these audit events should be sent as they occur. So in the diagram, you'll notice the key difference between the first proposal, the second one is this text field for where do you send the events. In this case, it's myapi.myapp.com. And then once that's been set, GitLab, rather than sending those events to a temporary internal storage, would send those to wherever that webhook API destination has been defined. And this should be both minimal as well as viable enough for us to start interacting with users, for them to start getting value out of it, and for us to start focusing on where do we want to go in subsequent iterations. I've got a proposal for a second iteration I'd like to walk you through, but we will, of course, update this iteration plan probably substantially after our first shipped version that we expose to end users. But the second iteration that I would propose is about adding additional endpoint, additional storage type support for the type of backing data stores that we know our users will have. In the first iteration, GitLab would be defining essentially, here's the message format, and here's the raw information. You as a user are responsible for storing it. But I think we have an opportunity here to really make it easy and delightful to use this experience out of the box by adding support for predefined storage types such as Amazon S3, Google Cloud Storage, And being aware of, hey, these endpoints require data in this form, we will just automatically format it in that form so you can easily store it without having to do any sort of extra processing. We could just save it directly to those buckets or locations, assuming that we know how to do that with one of these predefined types such as S3 or Google Cloud Storage. And so that's really what the goal of this second iteration would be. I've got a couple proposal options here beyond S3 and Google Cloud, such as if we have a JDBC connection string, an Apache Kafka endpoint, or even possibly somewhere in GitLab to store it. This would be something I think we can investigate for iteration 2 to provide some more value to our users. So some considerations and open questions for this epic. We'll just continue to add to these sections organically over time as we get further along in the epic, as we continue to do breakdown. Some of the initial questions we know we need to find answers for, though, is when we say streaming, what do we mean by that? And so the answer to this can really have a big difference on how we approach this from a technical perspective. If our users are expecting true real-time streaming versus near real-time streaming, or even just batching of these events as they occur, that will have a very distinct impact on how we approach actually doing these different iterations. Our working assumption for now is that a near real-time sort of system would be appropriate and give users the value that they need. This would allow them to drive automation based off of events as they occurred. But if there's a lag that's not substantial, but is longer than what would be considered true real time, that would be a good balance between giving users the rapid visibility they need without imposing a large amount of technical requirements for implementing that true real-time system. Because audit events are going to be something that could contain potentially sensitive information, we really need to dig into how do we build this securely? What are those security requirements that we need to impose on webhook-based audit events? There's going to be both authentication as well as authorization concerns here. You know, how do we make sure that who we're sending events to is who they say they are, that they're the person that was intended to be contacted when we set things up, who is authorized inside of GitLab to change what events are being monitored, where they're being sent, and then when we're actually sending that data, how do we do so effectively and securely? Can we leverage existing protocols like HTTPS? Do we add an additional layer of encryption on top of it? These are all things that we need to investigate before making a first delivery to ensure that the data that's inside these webhook-based audit events is going to stay secure. A UX question is, if we look at our users' ability to change the subset of events that are going to be sent from webhook-based audit events, what sort of expectations should we be setting around the user experience for those sort of activities? Will our users expect those older events to be lost if they've been removed or re-added in that subset? Will there be an expectation that they'll have been bundled? Would GitLab even be able to support something like that? And again, who would have permission to set these settings? And then again, there's a lot of different activities inside of GitLab that we would want to create audit events for. What is that relationship between events that occur at the instance level, the group level, the project level? How do those all interact? How can we best bundle, process, reform that data to be most valuable to our end users? These are some of the questions that we're thinking through now as we work through this proposal. And with that, we are at the end of the epic. And so I hope this video was informative to describe the high-level concept of what we're considering webhook-based audit events. Again, today is May 4th, 2021. Please reach out to myself, the team, or check out this epic description if you're watching this in the future to see if things have changed. And if you do have any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, I would love to hear from you. Thanks so much. Have a great day.